I'm Elizabeth. Oh, and we're being recorded. Perfect. I am Elizabeth Braatz with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, and yeah, I'm here to talk about bumblebees. So I hope all of you are doing well and get better soon and can go on trips again. Things are going through the office as well, so it's a good time, I guess, to stay safe and cozy and enjoy this fall weather, and maybe not look for bumblebees, but at least talk about them and get ready for next year. So yeah, I am the Bumblebee Brigade coordinator with the Department of Natural Resources, which is a statewide community science project or participatory science project. All of you could participate as well. And I'm also the terrestrial insect ecologist. So lots of bugs. All right. So today we're going to talk about how bumblebees, and especially the rusty patched bumblebee in particular, need our help. We're going to go over some bee biology, then bumblebee needs, native flowers, natural habitat, how we can help in our own lives and yards and places where we volunteer. Then kind of a deeper dive into flowers and gardens for spring, summer, and fall. Then we're going to go into bumblebee identification training so that when the bees start showing up again in spring, you all can recognize some of the species. And finally, I'm going to try and make sure to have some time at the end for questions. However, feel free, especially as we go from segment to segment, if you have questions, Amanda's going to be keeping an eye on the chat, and I'm happy to answer them. All right. So, Wisconsin bumblebees need our help. There are 20 species of bumblebees in Wisconsin, and of those, 7 of them are state species of greatest conservation need. They're highlighted in green here, and that means that they're listed by the state as rare or declining, and they could really use our help in Wisconsin. So we try to keep an eye out for them and manage our habitat for species such as these. 3 of them are species of greatest information need. So that means that we have almost no information about these bees. They're very mysterious. So we think that they're declining. We think that they're very rare, rare to the point where we don't even have enough information to know about how they're doing. So 3 species that are highlighted in black are species of greatest information need. A lot of them are cuckoo bumblebees, which I'll chat about a bit later. And then finally, last but not least, there is the rusty patched bumblebee or Bombus affinis, and this is a federally endangered species. Wisconsin is a very special place for this bumblebee, and we can all help them. So a bit more on the rusty patched bumblebee. The population declined by nearly 90%. They were declared a federally endangered species in 2017, and that decline was at least kind of recorded or estimated over the 10 years before 2017. If you look at this map over here, you can see that they used to be a really widespread species, fairly common. They used to stretch all the way from the East Coast to past Minnesota and all the way down to some of the southern states, all around the Great Lakes. And unfortunately, now they're pretty much just concentrated in the Midwest. And of those areas, Wisconsin is probably the hot spot for rusty patched bumblebees now in the United States. So we're a very special state, and we have a really amazing opportunity to kind of be the core of rusty patched bumblebee habitat currently. However, it's not just the rusty patched bumblebee. There's been widespread bumblebee declines. At least like a quarter of North American species are estimated, according to Hatfield et al. In the Xerces Society, to be at some kind of risk. And a lot of things are driving that. So why are they declining? Why are the pollinators going away? Well, one of the biggest ones is just habitat loss as we convert land to other things. That means less land for pollinators. Another one is intensive agriculture, which kind of leads into habitat loss, but because of pesticides, decreased floral diversity, disease, which we'll go over a bit later, competition, sometimes from commercial bees even, that agricultural land is no longer kind of the dotted with all the habitat that used to support things such as monarchs and bumblebees and native bees and so on. Pesticides also play a role for sure. It's very hard for pollinators to survive if we're poisoning the things that they rely on. Disease is also contributing. So disease is natural. However, when you have some of the commercial species, you get really concentrated pools of disease that then will spread out to the native species, and as well as climate change. So as we are getting different phenology, we're getting droughts, we're getting extreme weather events. None of that is particularly good for bees. And so when you combine all of those together, it's just one stressor on top of the other, and that's what's really kind of getting to them. However, all is not lost. We, I think that all of us can definitely make a difference, and that is one of the reasons why the Bumblebee Brigade exists. So our mission is to improve our understanding, management, and conservation activities of Wisconsin bumblebees. In order for the DNR to make habitat management decisions and see where we want to focus, see what is working, see hopefully what landscapes bees are doing well in, which ones, I wonder what's going on here. Maybe we need to look a bit more closely into this. We need to know where the species are. We need to know about the bees, where they are, how they're doing, and we need data for that. I'm one of two terrestrial insect ecologists with the Department of Natural Resources that is not nearly enough to count all of the bees in Wisconsin, and so that's why we rely on communities, participatory scientists such as yourselves. Long-term objectives are going to be to develop accurate maps of species distributions, kind of see how they're associating with different habitats, because that tells us, oh, well, this species, which is declining, really needs this kind of forced transition or something, then that's something to prioritize in certain habitat plans. Assess habitat conditions, determine conservation threats, and then, of course, just having that baseline population sense of what is on the ground and monitoring trends over time are all really important for planning. All right, so we have access to a chat. If I was out there in person with you, I'd be able to walk around and entertain you a little more. So I'm going to try and get everyone to be able to participate a bit. So feel free to put in the chat your guesses of how many native bee species you think are in Wisconsin. So we're moving on to some bee biology. All right. A few seconds for people to send in their guesses. And all right, so no worries if you're off as well. The answer is 400 to 500 species of native bees in Wisconsin. It is absolutely amazing to me every time I look out and start seeing bees, how many of them are native species. So yeah, a lot of them are. Oh, that is 50 is a-okay too. I would not have guessed this when I started this position either. So a lot of them are actually solitary species. So 85% of bees are solitary, and about 15% of those are semi-social. So the big colonies that you imagine with European honeybees and so on are actually not very common for bees. So if you see all these little grids. All the white ones are the native bees that are solitary, and then we have some social bees that work in families, and bumblebees are one of those. And then finally, we have one single cell here for the European honeybee, and those are actually not a native species. So there's still nothing against honeybees. I think they're great. I like honey. I like all they're doing for agriculture. However, they are a commercial species. They're basically livestock. So if you're going on a bee survey and trying to look up all the native bees, it's kind of like going on a bird survey and seeing a chicken. So still a bee, but not a native species. And so you see in this picture here, the European honeybee is the one on the left. They're a little thinner, they're less hairy, whereas the bumblebees are larger, more rotund, and a lot fluffier. Oh, next screen. Oh, there we go. All right, so a little more biology. So bumblebees are social. We have queens, workers, and males, and they're an annual colony. I'm going to go over their annual life cycle in a bit. They're able to adapt to a fairly wide variety of habitats, though you see them generally where the flowers are, so prairies and meadows and people's gardens and so on. In Wisconsin, they tend to be active about mid-April to early October. A couple of them will hang out till November generally, but those are the stragglers. And they're very fluffy, they're very hairy, and they're active early and later in the day, it tends to be. So kind of 10 a.m., the kind of mid-morning, and then in the afternoon as well. And the hairiness does serve a purpose. So the fluffier a pollinator is in general, the better it is at pollinating. So they'll kind of gather all that pollen you can see in that picture there, and then they'll groom themselves and they'll pack it all in to carry to the colony. And they'll pack it into a corbicula. So if you ever have seen, actually, honeybees and bumblebees both have these. Imagine if instead of, well, we have these nice pockets, but bumblebees don't have that. So instead, imagine having like a bucket welded to your leg, and that's how you can carry things. That's basically what they have on their back legs. It's this flattened section of the tibia that is called a corbicula. And what they do is they'll groom themselves and they'll grab pollen and then they'll stuff it all in and pack it into their corbicula to take back to feed the babies. However, fun fact, only female bumblebees have these corbiculas. So if you see, we get a guest speaker as well. Hi, Kitty. So if you see a bumblebee with a corbicula with pollen on that, that is definitely a female. The males do not do that because they do not bring pollen or pollen back to the nest. All right, so a bit more on the bumblebee life cycle. So we're in the winter, the queen is going to be underground, hibernating, and then in the spring, she emerges and she does all of the work. So you have in this early spring, you'll start seeing really large bumblebees searching across the ground, and those are new queens looking for food as well as looking for nesting sites. And so after the spring, hopefully the queen will have found spring blooming flowers. She'll find a nesting spot. She'll start creating wax pots to hold nectar and pollen. And once she's set up a little bit, then she starts laying eggs. And so once that first batch of bees emerges, those are her daughters, and they will then take over the foraging and a lot of the kind of work activities of the colony while the original queen stays back and makes more eggs. So a lot of the first generations of bees you'll see in early summer to late spring, they seem really small and tiny. And yeah, the generations of bees tend to get fatter and bigger over the season because early on it's just the poor queen doing all the work. So uh, they tend to make really small workers and just kind of shove them out into the world and say, okay, go work, mom's exhausted. Then in summer, that is when you have the peak colony size. So that's when you have the biggest most activity in the colony. You've got multiple batches of daughters going out and foraging for the colony. And then in fall, which is where we are right now, the colony starts to go back into decline. So we throughout this time, all the workers are not making eggs. However, and only the queen is. However, around late summerish, it's time to make a new queen. So the queen will produce additional queens called gynes, kind of like princesses, because they don't have a colony yet. And you'll start seeing queens as well as males. So they finally start creating males. They go out, they find girlfriends and boyfriends. They'll go forth, and then the new queens will go and find a place to hibernate over winter, which tends to be in leaf litter or other kind of plant detritus around the ground, and the rest of the colony dies. So right now we are in that cycle. So you're going to be seeing some males, especially common eastern male bumblebees, hang around hoping to find a queen. And maybe once in a while you'll see a really big bee going around. That's going to probably be a new queen for the season. But for the most part, a lot of the bees we're seeing are dying out because that's just it's the end of a cycle for them. So that's the cycle of life for bumblebees. All right, does anyone have questions about the bumblebee life cycle before we go into habitat? All right, sweet. Well, feel free to type in if you come up with a question later. All right, so what do bees need from us? Well, they need the same things that we do. They need food, water, shelter. So they need nesting habitat, they need overwintering habitat, they need water, and they need floral resources. So we're gonna go over each of those. So first of all, biology, nesting habitat. So again, bumblebees have colonies founded by a single queen. They only last a season. They have about 100 to 400 workers, and they need a place to store all those workers and all those queens and the queen and the cells and everything. And so, brush piles, unmowed areas. They actually really like rodent burrows. They'll go into abandoned rodent burrows, as well as kind of tussocky grasses. Well, we've seen a lot of colonies using those as nests, and that's a really important part of their life cycle. Oh, you see this picture here is actually once in a while they actually use bird houses as well. A lot of them are in the ground though. All right, a little bonus since it's fall season. I figured we could go over some fall and overwintering specific tips from the Xerxes Society, and this is also available online. So I really recommend this resource. It's absolutely wonderful, and if you don't remember all of the details we go over right now, then you can always check back on their notes through this really handy guide. So one thing that you can do, and I said that we would be focusing on bumblebees, but I guess I'll give some shout outs to the native bees. Some of these things are also just good for all the native bees as well as bumblebees. Saving the stems. So a lot of the native bees will use the kind of pithy insides of stems to uh they'll lay eggs in there, and then they'll kind of wait over winter. And so leaving those stems is really valuable for them because that's where what they're using as habitat. So that's a lot of the solitary bees. So really, the just do less work in your gardens, and you can save those. I have I have some making sure that I check my notes. There you go. Another thing that you can do is leaving the leaves. So as again, the less work, the better. Leaf litter is really valuable for all sorts of species of insects, including bumblebees, because they'll use that leaf litter as habitat to kind of hide in and hibernate under. So this is our only picture of a rusty patched bumblebee queen over winter. It was actually found on accident. Someone was doing a survey for jumping worms, and they found a queen rusty patched bumblebee. And just as we were telling people, she was using that leaf litter, and it was very exciting to see. He put her right back. Luckily, he knew what she was, but yeah, leaving the leaves is really helpful for that. And uh, a couple inches, I know, especially if you try to keep some turf lawn in your yard, a couple inches or more can smother turf, but a thin layer should be perfectly fine. And research has shown that it even helps lawns because it provides organic material and decomposes to provide nutrients. Another option, if you don't want them all kind of scattered over your lawn, is if you do rake them up, you can actually kind of use them like a mulch in flower beds or along the sides of gardens. And it works very similar to mulch, but it's free, it's natural, and it'll help build soil. Another thing again is you could pile it around the trees for mulch, and it'll also provide moisture retention. And finally, if you do decide to remove some leaves in the spring, timing wise, it's helpful to wait until kind of late spring if you leave it over winter so that the critters such as queen bumblebees and different larvae for butterflies can emerge before then. Another thing is rethinking mulch. So you can see this little tiny native bee here. Mulch pieces seem small to us, but they're huge uh, kind of barriers for a lot of the native bees. So if you have a really thick mulch barrier about all of these nesting bees, so a lot of bees will nest in the ground about 70% of them are actually ground nesters, and they cannot physically reach the places where they would want to have colonies if there's too much mulch. So you can see this picture over here. This is an example of what a little solitary bee in the ground might look like. And as you tell, if the mulch is really thick, it's really hard for them to reach there. If possible, kind of avoiding plastic mulch, landscape fabric, really heavy wood chips, as well as chemically treated and colored wood chips, will just really help out those little pollinators that are making homes all along the soil area. Alternatives can be kind of shallow layer of pebbles. They like that. Compost, leaf litter, plant debris as mulch can all work really, really well. And sometimes you do want a little bit of mulch in your garden. I'm not saying to just take it all out, but leaving bits of the ground bare or less mulched so that the bees can get to the ground for hibernation and so on is really helpful. As well as sometimes I've actually one of our top volunteers at the Bumblebees, she does kind of a opposite mulch pattern where she leaves the most of the garden unmulched and then she mulches down paths for people to walk through. So that could be really convenient. Planting a log as well. So a lot of species will really enjoy logs for habitat. And so you can, well, if it's safe, you can retain dead trees, or you can kind of have, if you have extra logs or wood detritus, you can lay them down horizontally. You can kind of bury one end of them and even put in bunch grasses or rocks along there. And then it just becomes this wonderful habitat for all sorts of little critters. Finally, brush piles as well. So believe it or not, you often think of brush piles as really messy, but that one is a brush pile. It's just got all these nice plants on top of it. So you could plant things on top of brush piles and use it as a sort of raised bed. You can just stack them really neatly and be creative about that, and it provides a really nice habitat for all sorts of creatures underneath it. And then finally, rock piles. So bumblebees will sometimes use rock piles for nesting areas as well. I've seen them kind of go in and out of them sometimes, and they'll have the nest inside. So rock piles can be really helpful for native bees, and they look nice. Water as well. So bees will sometimes use shallow bird baths. The trick is if you can put pebbles or something in them so that they have somewhere to perch on. Although planting good flowers also helps a lot with the water thing because they get liquids from the nectar as well. And overall, this kind of just all leads into just redefining what a perfect lawn is. Is it a manicured turf grass, or do we want a few more living critters in there? And rethinking that is just a really helpful way to be okay with some messiness, since nature can be messy. And along those lines, pollinator signs can be really helpful because, especially once you don't have all these beautiful flowers going, it can help people understand that this is deliberate. It's not that you're being um, messy or lazy, and this is what a good lawn can also look like. And then going into again the kind of soft landings idea. So that's the idea that basically, if you recall the bumblebee life cycle, it's a really, really important time of their life is spring, because that's when all the queens are out and they're out and about, they're searching for food. So they really, really need those spring ephemerals. And they also need places where they can hibernate. So if you have that leaf litter and then spring ephemerals around trees, it can provide really, really great habitat for them. Floral resources. So native plant gardens with really diverse, abundant floral resources is really, really valuable. This may look like a meadow to us, and to a bee, however, this looks like this amazing Thanksgiving feast. So as you can see, there's all sorts of different flowers of different species and heights and floral, I guess, depths of flowers. And some bees will have longer faces and some of them will have shorter faces. And so that kind of affects how easily they can get to different flowers. And so just having a variety of them will help with that. Keystone, this is just a really nice resource. The Dr. Doug Tallamy found that certain kind of groups of plants helped a lot of native pollinators. And so you can really kind of get a really good return on investment for some species. Additional resources, so Xerxes Society, Bringing Nature Home, and Heather Holmes' books are all really helpful. But the main thing is each of us with every flower we plant can really make a difference. So now we're going to go into more really focusing in on those native plant species. So April through May, and just to kind of make it fun, we're gonna do this from a perspective of the Rusty Patched Bumblebees, since they are rare and it's so cool to be able to see them in our own yards. So April through May, again, that's when the queens are emerging, and so they really need those nectar and pollen producing flowers early in the year. So here are some ideas for flowers, and just note that blooming times are approximate. They can vary by locality, and of course, with the unusual weather lately, sometimes nothing goes quite as how it used to. But early on, Dutchman's breeches can be a really nice pollinator plant. Oh, and also fun fact: all of these pictures are of rusty patch bumblebees. So in early spring, the queens actually don't have a rusty patch. They just look like this, which makes it really hard to identify them. But I assure you, these are all rusty patch bumblebee queens. So Dutchman's breeches are really wonderful, and they often are in kind of more shaded, woody areas. Virginia bluebells are excellent, really beautiful flowers. I was out doing a survey in spring earlier this year, and just entire hillside was covered in bluebells, and it was almost I started getting kind of paranoid because every few steps I was seeing queen bumblebees emerge from the leaf litter. So they were definitely using the leaves. They were definitely using the bluebells. Virginia waterleaf is another really good one. Another kind of spring ephemeral, often quasi woodland and shade associated. Shooting star, now moving into May, is a really great one. And so this one, they're really fun because they don't provide a ton of nectar. They mostly provide pollen. And as you can see, the way that they're shaped, they're really well suited for buzz pollination. So that's something that bumblebees do that a lot of other bees don't do, which is also one of the reasons they're just really efficient, really good pollinators, is basically they hang upside down from these flowers and they just vibrate and it shakes the pollen onto their bodies and then they gather it all up. So it's a way for them to get pollen from plants that a lot of other bees can't get to. So shooting star are really nice flowers and really good for bumblebees. Plum trees. So a lot of the kind of Native American plums or apple trees, actually, they really like as well, are really well suited for bumblebees. We see them on them very frequently. And heads up for some of the native plum species I've had, they can have thorns and they'll kind of make a thicket, but sometimes that can be also a good thing in a yard. So they're a fairly small tree. All right, so those are the spring flowers. Now we're gonna move into June. And so around June, the first brood of bumblebee workers are emerging from the nest. They're beginning feeding and raising the next brood of the young. And the queens can finally rest inside of the colony and kind of stay in for the rest of the year. So now we're going to start seeing worker rusty patch bumblebees, as well as, well, I guess some queens still out. So wood betony is another fairly early, though not quite as early blooming species. Can be kind of hard to find. It's actually a parasitic plant. So it doesn't kill the other plants, but it does kind of mooch nutrients off of other plants around it. But bees really like it. So it's a very nice plant for pollinators. St. John's wort is just a wonderful flower. It doesn't bloom just in June. It blooms well past that as well, but it starts around June. You can see now we're starting to see the workers with the little rusty patches, and it's just a wonderful flower. And other pollinators will like it as well. Anise hyssop is another really great bumblebee plant, and there's a study on what rusty patch bumblebees enjoy the most, and hyssop species were one of the top four. All right, so now we're going into midsummer to late summer. So this is actually peak population time for bumblebees, including rusty patch bumblebees. You've got workers raising and feeding the new queens. Males are starting to come out in late summer. And then, of course, the colony is still going very strong at this point. So this is when you can see all the all the sexes of bumblebees. All right, so wild bergamot is a really, oops, really Oh, good question. So, what do bees eat? The flowers? Kind of. So they're grabbing nectar and pollen from the flowers. So, all pollination is accidental. Also, uh, even though both species are benefiting from it, uh, the bees really are just trying to get calories for the babies, and the pollinators are just trying to trick the bees into helping them have sex with other flowers. So the in order to do that, a lot of flowers will create nectar, which is just it's kind of like soda from flowers. It's just this really nice sweet liquid to lure the bees and other pollinators and moths and hummingbirds and butterflies in to drink that nectar. And as they're going in to get that nectar, they will accidentally brush against pollen, and then when they go to the next plant, they drop off some of that pollen, again, all on accident to the other flower. The bees are not trying to help the flowers, they just want their food. So when the bees are collecting and eating pollen, the flowers aren't necessarily wanting them to grab all that pollen because really they want that pollen to be distributed to other flowers. But a lot of pollinators have learned to eat the pollen as well, which it's has kind of like the male genetic material for flowers, because it's really high protein and really good for bees. But even when they're collecting pollen, they're accidentally transferring it to other flowers as well. And then sometimes you'll actually see, I don't know if you have a picture of that, but sometimes though pollinators will be kind of lazy. And so if you ever look at, especially bleeding hearts and sometimes bluebells as well, if the tube of the flower is so long that it's a little inconvenient for the bee to go in all the way up through the normal part of the flower to get at the nectar, what they'll do, especially actually Rusty Patched Bumble Bees are really kind of bad about this. They'll go around to the back of the flower and they'll just bite into it and sneak out the nectar from the other side without actually pollinating it. So, yeah, next spring, keep an eye out for your flowers and see if there's little holes in the back of them. And if there are, that means that a bee was robbing your flower and didn't actually pollinate that one because they just bit through the flower instead. But they're still very good for flowers. They cheat sometimes. Good question. All right, so this is a wild bergamot, and it's a really, really wonderful plant. So again, this was actually one of the top 4 plants that we saw Rusty Patched Bumblebees on in a paper that was released last year. But pretty long blooming time, really tough. It can be, well, mostly I see it in sun, but it can be in partial shade as well. And just a real all-star of a flower. Culver's root is another really, really great one. That one can get a little longer. Mountain mint, another excellent kind of peak bumblebee season flower. Giant hyssop, another of the hyssops, which were some of the most popular flowers for Rusty Patched bumblebees. And now we're going into kind of the end of the summer and the beginning of, well, around now. So as you go outside, you probably have noticed not that many flowers left. However, one of the few ones that remains are New England asters. So they are some of the latest blooming flowers in Wisconsin, and bees really, really rely and benefit from them late season. So then, yeah, again, September, October. So the volume of flowers is waning. New queens are mating and feeding, so they try to fatten up for the hibernation. This period is really critical to the survival of the new queens that will then start next year's generation. So even though it's a little easier sometimes to find summer blooming plants, it's really important to remember those shoulder seasons of spring and fall because that's when the queens are actually the most out. So obedient plant is a really good one. And again, we're back into late season. That's when the gynes. So a gyne is just kind of a princess bumblebee, a future queen. So they don't have a colony yet, so we call them gynes. So now you're starting to see the ones without rusty patch because they're gynes or future queens. So obedient plant's really good. Field thistle. Hear me out. I know that thistles are not always desirable in gardens, and so that's perfectly understandable. If your garden can allow it, however, field thistle and those native Wisconsin thistles are actually really, really good for bumblebees. They just have a huge amount of nectar and pollen compared to a lot of other plants, and we see the queens and the workers on them all the time. Actually, one of the best ways if you're just walking through a field and you want to see bees and you're not seeing a ton of them is I always just keep an eye out for the thistle because they often are a magnet for them and they bloom really late. Joe Pyreid is another one, a really, really good one. This one can live in a bit wetter areas as well. It does get fairly large, uh, but it's a really, really wonderful flower and a really pretty one. Showy goldenrod is another one. So there's a lot of different species of goldenrods, and they all of them are actually really good for pollinators. So I see them on them quite often. We just are mentioning showy goldenrod because it blooms later in the season, and so it's really helpful for those shoulder seasons, the new queens. And then New England aster is so good. It's listed twice because again, those things just last really, really long, and so because it's the only thing left blooming, oftentimes you'll see a lot of bees on it, especially late season. So this is kind of the summary of April through October. Again, it can vary a little bit depending on where you are, but this should be generally appropriate for Wisconsin. Shout out to Judy Cardine, who is a Bumblebee Brigade member and wonderful volunteer who put this table together. Where is all this data coming from? So it is this plan recommendation was put together thanks to, in part, also a research paper that was published in 2022 by Dr. Amy Wolf out of UW Green Bay, as well as a couple of the Bumblebee Brigade members from the Department of Natural Resources, Susan Carpenter from the UW University of Wisconsin Arboretum, and then finally Dr. Jean, who specializes in bees in Wisconsin. So they took a lot of Bumblebee Brigade data. So thank you to the many volunteers whose thousands and thousands and thousands of photographs helped us learn where Rusty Patched Bumblebees were most enjoying flowers. And so the paper is free to read, so you're welcome to read it. However, we also have shorter versions of things if you just kind of want the spark notes of it. So this is another example of all the different timing of all these different plants that Judy put together. And then finally, there's a handout. So I can send with Amanda some of these resources after if people want to have access to them. But this reminds you of join the Bumblebee Brigade and then the life cycle. And then these are the native plants that I was talking about earlier, just in one really quick kind of single guide. All right, so we've covered. Oh, then finally, Wisconsin DNR pollinators website has a lot of helpful suggestions for habitat. All right, so we've covered the habitat, what bees are in Wisconsin, why we care about them, what they need, and so now let's just quick cover the top 5 beginner bees, so that next year, because you'll definitely remember the details of this next year, but this will at least be a good first start, and you can always get involved again in spring. Some bees to keep a lookout for. So we're gonna cover 5 of them, and so hopefully you can keep an eye on them and send in some photos in the future. So first of all, don't worry about this. Okay, so we'll all get involved here. If you want to go and check out the field guide, whoops, on the Wisconsin Bumblebee Brigade website, I highly recommend you go onto that website if you can and pull up this field guide because I am going to be giving you opportunities to try and ID bees yourselves while you're watching this. All right, so again, that is if you go on the Wisconsin Bumblebee Brigade website, and there's the field guide PDF. And actually, I might even share that in the group chat to make it a little easier for you all. Wisconsin Bumblebee Brigade, go resources, field guide. All right, so here I'm gonna put it in the chat for folks. From current. There we go. There we go. All right, so it is in the chat. So go ahead and click the link so that you can follow along with the field guide. There we go. All right, so what do we look at when we're deciding how to categorize bees and what species they are? All right, so first of all, we'll do a crash course in bumblebee morphology. We're gonna look at their face. So the color of the bee face is actually really helpful for identifying them. Another thing to look for is the vertex. So that is kind of the nape of the neck up to the kind of back of the head of the bee. And so that's vertex is right here. And so kind of you imagine the back of my neck of the nape of my neck. The color of that is actually really helpful for identifying bees. And then finally, bees have three body parts. So they've got head, thorax, and abdomen. And so sometimes after a Thanksgiving meal, you feel like you have multiple kind of parts to your stomach, but bees actually do. So they have 6 to 7 abdominal segments or terga. So terga or T is just the abdominal segment. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in this case. And the males actually have one more segment to that. And so which color those different segments are can really help us for identifying bees. So again, face, vertex, and then abdominal segments or terga, what colors those are, really helpful. All right, our first beginner bee is the common eastern bee. I can guarantee if you have seen a bumblebee anywhere, you have probably seen a common eastern bee at some point in your life. And so also heads up, the bees that we're covering right now, I'm just covering the females, because most of the bees you're going to see are going to be female. And so don't worry about all the weird morphs or the males right now. It's good to just kind of get involved and started. So the thing with the common eastern bee is the first terga is, oh, wait, there he is. Can you see my cursor? Anyway, the first terga is yellow and everything else is black. A very simple bee. And then we've got a kind of nice square thorax patch, yellow vertex, and a black face. The males have a yellow face. So again, these are the 4 segments with the common eastern bumblebee as an example. And then here's a picture. So we've got, again, the yellow vertex, black face, nice short, even hair. And we've got, most importantly of all, though, if you pay attention to nothing else, T1 is yellow and everything else is black. So we know for sure this is a common eastern bumblebee. Here's another one. Oh, wonderful. Yes, you can see the cursor. Thank you, Claire. All right, so again, here's another example, a large kind of intermixed thorax patch. Got a dark face, we've got a yellow, and this one actually has a bit of mixing in the vertex, but we have some yellow here. But most importantly, yellow T1, everything else is black. So now is the quiz time, but it is okay because no one's actually grading, so you can just test on your own. So if you look at these bees, so these are the top 5 kind of beginner bees. And can you point out the common eastern one? So again, think of that T1 is yellow, everything else is black. Give you a few seconds to think in your heads. All right, so I'll give the answer. This one, the top right one, this is like our common eastern bumblebee, a very common bee species, but a good one. We've got, again, the big kind of square thorax patch. We've got a black face. This one should have a bit of yellow, but most importantly of all, and the biggest one is T1 yellow, everything else black. So that's a common eastern. Another very common one that is definitely in the Milwaukee area is the two-spotted bumblebee. So it's just basically the same as the common eastern, but it's just a little bit fancier. So we've got T1 yellow, and then the rest of it is black, except these 2 little lobes. It's kind of like a little upside-down McDonald's bee. And then they also have a yellow vertex and a black face. All right, so here's a picture of one. Oh, wow, this one is a really hardworking little female. She's got also its pollen, but yeah, we've got, again, black. Also, these notes include the face length. Don't worry about that for now, especially if you're starting out with bees. It's something, after seeing a couple hundred of them, you'll start getting a sense of whether they have a long or short face. But I'm covering the really key characteristics right now. For almost all the bees of the species will have these. And that is, we're going to have that yellow vertex is right here. We've got a black face. T1 is yellow, and then T2 is centrally yellow in a little W shape. And this is a little easier when you get it from the dorsal view. So again, we've got T1 yellow and a little upside down McDonald's. All right, it is time to do another test. So check out these species. Can you pick out the two-spotted bumblebee? I'll give you a few seconds. All right, so I'll give it away. It is the middle one. So we have T1 yellow and then that little McDonald's W space in T2, and everything else is black. So again, very similar to the common eastern bee, but with a little bit of extra. Awesome. All right, now we're going on to the brown-belted bumblebee. And so this is, again, a very common bee, definitely in your area. And so we have T1 is yellow. A lot of these nice beginner bees are actually really convenient in that they're very similar to the common eastern bee with just like a little bit extra. So T1 is yellow. T2 is, we've got a brown belt. So a little half moon that is almost always brown. Sometimes it's like a really light brown. The color can vary, but surrounded by black. And so T1 yellow, brown belt, black vertex, black base. And here's a picture of one. So black face, black vertex. Also, they have a really small thorax dot right here. And then more importantly, we've got T1 yellow and then T2. It kind of looks similar to that two-spotted bumblebee, but this is, instead of a like separate little lobes, it's a brown belt surrounded by all black. And this is you can get it a bit easier. See, T1 is yellow. Don't worry about sometimes they'll have a little bit of hair missing here. So you'll see a little black kind of in between segments, but then you have T2, instead of two separate little tiny lobes, we've got a little belt here. And they also have short, even hair. And that little kind of small thorax patch. Black face, black vertex. And actually, if you recall, the two-spotted bumblebee had a yellow vertex, so that's another thing that differentiates them. Right, so can you spot the brown-belted bumblebee? Give you some seconds. Here they are. So we've got T1 yellow, T2 similar to that two-spotted bumblebee, except we have more of a belt that is then surrounded by black rather than two little lobes. And they're a little better groomed. So they have shorter hair. They've got that smaller thorax patch, and it's hard to tell from this picture, but they have a black vertex in face, whereas this one has a yellow vertex. And again, your field guides that you have up will kind of help with differentiate these as well. Our next one is the yellow bumblebee or the Bombus fervidus. So this one is a little patchier throughout the state, but I think there's a chance of finding them throughout. And the reason I'm mentioning this is it's very distinctive looking, and it's a state species of greatest conservation need. So always fun to find one of those. So this one, they've got a long band in the thorax patch, black face, black vertex, and lots of yellow. Very well named for the yellow bumblebee. 1, 2, 3, 4 yellow segments. So here's a picture of one. We have a black face, black vertex, that band along the thorax, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 yellows. So lots of yellow. And then T6, 5, and 6 are black. And there is a similar species that has a lot of yellow, but they have a yellow vertex and yellow face, and it would be a lot more unusual to see it where you are because it's Montbus borealis or the northern amber bee. But we won't worry about that right now. All right, so again, this is a yellow bumblebee. We've got black face, black vertex. That band, instead of kind of a thorax dot, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, lots of yellow. All right, so can you find the yellow bumblebee in the pictures? The quiz is getting easier now that you've already identified a bunch of the other ones. All right, so it is this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, lots and lots of yellow, way more yellow than the rest of these guys. That band along the thorax and black face, black vertex. And then finally, last but not least, you probably mostly just want to know if you can identify Rusty Patched Bumble Bee. So this is how you ID them. They are federally endangered. You can see all of these new counties in purple that the Bumblebee Brigade has found new county records in, which has been really helpful for habitat management and kind of getting money on the ground also for habitat management. So we have yellow, we have a black face, we have a black vertex, although the males actually have a yellow vertex. The thorax patch tends to kind of wick slightly downwards, and it's almost kind of like a triangle-ish. But most importantly, T1 is yellow, T2 is yellow, and then in the middle is this little rusty patch. And the color can vary a little bit, but it tends to be reddish or kind of rusty-ish. But it's different from the brown-belted bumblebee because the brown-belted bumblebee, we have T1 yellow and then a brown belt surrounded by all black. For the rusty patch, we've got yellow, a little bit of red, more yellow, and then all black. So T1 yellow, T2 yellow, and then that little rusty patch. And so then we got black face, black vertex. It's kind of hard to tell, but this is wicking back here in the thorax patch. T1 is yellow, T2 is yellow, and then you've got a little rusty patch in the middle there. So a very, very fun, very special bee. This one has a easier patch. So we got a really, really clear rusty patch here, surrounded again by all yellow is important. And then that wicking back thorax patch. All right, so by process of elimination, you can find the Rusty Patched Bumblebee right here in the bottom left. So if you do end up submitting bees to Bumblebee Brigade, the website was on the start of my page, or you can just kind of Google Wisconsin Bumblebee Brigade. It's a really, really great place to, because what we do is we use the data that community scientists send in to decide how we manage habitats and make management plans and organize resources. Also, if it's a rusty patch bumblebee, we share that data with the Fish and Wildlife Service so that they have a series of high potential zones, they're called, that if a rusty patch is known to be at that around that area, then depending on if people have to apply for certain permits from the DNR, if we know rusty patch are in there, we will send in requirements of, hey, make sure that you kind of, depending on what you're doing, think of this or keep this little bit clear. Or even when we're doing management ourselves, if it's in a high potential zone, we have to kind of keep that in mind to make sure we don't accidentally take out their habitat. So really, really helpful for that. And what you do is you create an account online and send in photos and try to do your best to guess which bee it is. It makes it a lot easier for us to verify it on our end. But no worries if you get it wrong. That's part of it too. Wisconsin Bumblebee Observers Facebook page is also a really, really wonderful resource. There's about 1,900 people on there now. It's a very active community. People are always posting photos of the bees they're finding. Oh, what's this? Is this one where you wouldn't believe what I found here? So that one is actually run by top volunteer Judy Cardine. So shout out to her for we adapted this presentation from one of hers actually. And then questions, feel free to send an email to the Wisconsin Bumblebee Brigade email. And then does anyone have questions?